It's Monday, and that means it's time for a new episode of Interviewing People, the career cast where you can learn about a variety of careers from people actually doing the work. Today I'll be talking with Jessica MacMurray, who once walked these halls and is now a clinical research coordinator at the Ohio State University James Cancer Hospital. Jessica will be sharing about her time in the OSU marching band, how her animal science degree helps her in her career, and much more. So enjoy the show. Welcome back to another edition of the Interviewing People Career Cast. And today we have 1999 Van Buren graduate Jessica MacMurray with us. And she currently works at Ohio State as a clinical research coordinator. And she's going to talk a little bit about her experience, how she ended up here, how she went from the Ohio State marching band to working as a clinical research assistant, and now she's the coordinator, and she's had quite a path that she's been on. So Jessica, thank you very much for joining us and being willing to share your story. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your time with the Ohio State marching band, especially since tomorrow is the big game against Michigan. What was that like, and how did you end up being part of the band?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this series that you're doing. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're helping the students with figuring out how to negotiate the path that is finding a career and not necessarily one that's really set in stone most of the time. So how I ended up in marching band, the Ohio State marching band is one of the reasons why I went to Ohio State. The other one was veterinary school. I had hoped to go to veterinary school and I wanted to be in the band. Those were my two goals for college. And everybody every year tries out for the marching band. Your space isn't guaranteed if you make it 1 year that you're going to be in band for the next 4. And your space isn't guaranteed if you're a regular marcher every week. We have something that's called challenges where each row, with the exception of one, has 2 alternates. And you have to, those alternates, challenge someone the Monday before a new performance to make sure that everybody's marching at their best. And if that regular isn't marching the best, then you have the potential to beat them and get their spot. Now they can get it back, but you have the potential to be on the field, whereas as an alternate, you would be off to the side. So regular tryouts, you have marching tryouts, playing tryouts, and then a combination. There's 4 sets of those. And there are very few kids that come from the tiny schools like ours. There were a couple kids from Findlay, and I know there were 2 guys that were from Arlington that their last year was my freshman year of college. So it is not a walk in the park. It's really difficult. And you have to put in the work, but when you earn it, you earn it, and you earn it every week. So it's a sense of accomplishment, and I mean, it helps you be really, really organized with school as well.
Right.
Another benefit to that, though, is a lot of people would generally tend to think that the marching band is made up of music majors. It's not the case at all. It's not required. And a lot of the professors don't necessarily like their main music majors to be in the marching band. Most of the majors within marching band are engineering students. There was a girl in my row freshman year who was an engineering physics major, which kind of blew my mind. She works for NASA now. But yeah, it's just mind-boggling the number of engineering students that are in marching band.
Right. That's really interesting. And I didn't realize you had to re-earn your seat every week. And now you were in for all 4 years?
I was in three.
Three, okay.
So I marched for George W. Bush's reelection in that inaugural parade. I marched at the Fiesta Bowl when we beat Miami in 3 overtimes.
Oh, very cool.
When we played in the Alamo Bowl and then another Fiesta Bowl.
Okay. Wow,
So,
that's awesome. So you had some amazing experiences with that.
just a few.
Yeah.
It puts you in touch with a lot of groups, and you get a lot of access to not just the people who are in band with you. Like that freshman year, I had a TA in my row for the math class I was taking. And that was infinitely helpful because he could help me with that math stuff that I was getting confused on.
Right.
So you are in touch with resources you don't realize you have. And in purely size-wise, Ohio State's marching band is actually the smallest marching band in the Big Ten. We are capped at 200 and I think it's now 230 members, just encompassing all of the alternates and a few, I think there's a few other things that they're incorporating, which to do double scripts takes everybody. Single script is 192 spots, and double script takes all the alternates and a few of the student staff as well,
Okay.
to make those up. So.
Okay. Very cool. So you talked about being interested in going into animal science, and you intended to go to Ohio State to major in veterinary science. You did earn your degree in that. What was it that led you to start down that path when you chose to go to Ohio State?
As far as wanting to go to vet school or?
Right.
So actually the dream of wanting to be a veterinarian started when I was 4. I knew Ohio State very early on. I don't know if I researched it or how I came to the knowledge that Ohio State had one of the very few veterinary schools in the nation that exist. And it's one of the better programs that you can go to. But very early on, I wanted to go to Ohio State, wanted to go to their vet school, ultimately never ended up applying, but that had always been my career goal and trajectory, even up until, gosh, probably I graduated college, where I was like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to go to vet school. Well, I'm here and I still haven't gone to vet school.
So you left or finished your degree, and it looks like you then started doing a little bit of work as a technician for Battelle and Ohio State. What was that, or what led you to go that direction and start down that path?
So graduated, I knew academically there were a few classes that I did not meet the standard that would have allowed me to have a competitive application to veterinary school. So I figured I'd work somewhere for a little while, eventually come back, do those classes again, and be more competitive. And so I actually, not long after graduation, found out about an internship in Florida for a breeding farm for horses, because at the time, animal sciences was divided by species and not 4 different specialties. It's organized a little bit different now. It's like meat science, you can do part of your coursework for veterinary technician at OSU. That's shared with Columbus State. Nutrition and reproduction is how it's divided now. So it's a little bit different. I focused on horses and went to a breeding farm in Florida for 6 months. And during that time is when the recession of '08 was happening. And I had a couple friends that actually had gotten jobs at Battelle. And they're like, hey, let us introduce you to this recruiter for a temp agency, see if we can get you a job here too. Because they knew when I came back, I would have to have a job. So that is ultimately how I fell into a job at Battelle. I was there for 2 years and I worked solely with rats and mice. And in a court, Battelle is the largest nonprofit research and development company in the world. There are branches everywhere, but their home base is here in Columbus. And so they do lots of different types of research, be it government contracting or cybersecurity, I think is one of their things they do now. And I did a lot of toxicology research. So our group in its entirety was doing testing with rats and mice to see, okay, is this product that's on the shelf going to potentially cause cancer? So for 2 years, I was trying to keep people from developing cancer. Wow. Unfortunately, the economy caught up with research in that area, and I unfortunately was laid off from there. So I was unemployed for about like 6 or 7 months. Eventually got on for a year as a husbandry tech at Ohio State, and that's how I ended up back at the university.
Okay. So with the job at Battelle, did they care that you had did your degree with animal science, did that help you get that job, or did that not really have anything to do with that?
So they liked the fact that I had a degree. They liked the fact that I knew about husbandry and I had a really heavy science background. A lot of people would scoff at an animal sciences degree simply because, yeah, you're learning how to breed animals and pick stalls is what a lot of people think of when they think of animal sciences. And it's more in depth than that. You're learning about balancing nutritional levels and, okay, this animal is having X problem. Is it because of something nutritionally? Is it something wrong with their conformation? Did they get a disease? You know, what's going on that's leading to this problem? So you can bring in the appropriate groups to help take care of the problem.
Okay.
And it's not always necessarily the veterinarian. Animal sciences can get you to be, if you earned even a master's degree, probably in animal nutrition, you could work at some place like a Cargill or DuPont to a certain extent in their animal nutrition departments. So
how did you end up, you said you kind of started looking at cancer with Battelle, but now with Ohio State, you're at the James Cancer Hospital, at the Research Institute, so forth. How did you end up going from animals to all of that cancer, studying cancer in humans and obviously trying to prevent that?
So was a husbandry tech at OSU for a year. Unfortunately, while they asked for a degree, the work that I was doing really didn't require it. And made connections and was able to move into a lab that studied chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And so I was one of their mouse techs. And actually, there's it's new to the advertising realm, but if you see advertisements for Imbruvica, I think is how it's said. How I know it is ibrutinib. So it is a drug that for the vast majority of people who suffer from chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLL, puts them in remission almost immediately. There are certain types of CLL that it doesn't treat, but for the vast majority, it does. And I am on about 3 or 4 research papers in treating that with ibrutinib and the research that we did to use it for treatment. And I mean, I was just a very simple mouse tech. I just did the mouse work, which when I say mouse work, I might be giving them a shot once a day of a particular drug to treat their cancer that they have. And that's probably the most mouse work that I would do. But maintaining cages, making sure that we had the proper numbers of animals, were we breeding pairs that would be beneficial to the research, ages of animals. We had some really simplistic studies of like dosed water, dosed food, where they're constantly getting that food to take care of their disease.
One thing that you said there, you talked about, making connections, and that led you to this new position. Beyond the band, or even in addition to the band, can you talk a little bit about the role that relationships have played in your career journey? And you said that some friends were working at Battelle. That's how you ended up at Battelle in the first place. How has building relationships impacted your career journey?
Building relationships has helped me get at least 2 jobs. Like I got the one at Battelle through my friends who knew a recruiter who put me in touch with them, and that's how I got that. My current position is because I let my manager know, how can I help someone else in our group? And this is a former manager. I was able to get the bulk of my work done pretty quickly, and so I would always offer to help. And one day she said, hey, this section is pretty short-staffed. Would you be willing to give up Monday through Wednesday mornings to go help them? And then you come back here and do your regular work. But for the most part, those 3 days, you go stay up there. Yeah, sure, that'd be great. I had a lab background at that point. This was helping out with the lab. And so I was able to go help with them for, an entire summer. And that connection allowed that manager to know, hey, she really knows her stuff. We work well together. She works well with this group of people. And so that's what helped me to at least get an interview. And then I'd like to think it gave me a really good footing to get this particular job I have now.
Right. Now, what exactly do you do as a clinical research coordinator?
So I am slightly different than the normal clinical research coordinator. Most of the clinical research coordinators are patient-facing. So you could come into the James and see your physician for whatever cancer you've been referred to or you see regularly. And they would say, okay, well, I know we have X study coming up. This is what it's about, but we'll have the coordinator come in and speak to you and give you a little bit more information so you have a general basis of what's going on, what's expected of you as a research patient, and go from there. Normal coordinators would then go in and they have the research protocol memorized, or near as close to memorized as possible. And they can answer any and all questions. They can let you know what the schedule looks like, and ask you if you're interested in just taking more information home versus would you like to sign consent now? So you legally have to sign consent to being on a research study from which you can remove yourself voluntarily at any time.
Okay.
My role, I represent the clinical trials processing lab for the James. I see no patients. I take in any new trials that we have, and I take a protocol that's probably about 200 pages long. If there is one, a lab manual that may be of equal length, and I boil it down to 1 page. Because just in the James by itself, we have over 200 protocols open at any given time. And that's just with lab involvement. There are other protocols that don't require us at all. So I don't know how many more trials beyond that, but just in the lab, there's 200 protocols open.
Wow.
So we have meetings called study initiation visits, where we meet with the sponsor of the trial, and all the personnel that are going to be potentially involved with this study. So that will be the PI, the lead research nurse, the coordinator from the disease group, myself, anybody with benefits registration. So they're figuring out, hey, are some of the insurance coverages going to cover some of this stuff? Or are we going to have to get funding from elsewhere? In addition to those people, budgets come to these meetings. And so it's probably a dozen or so people that would come to this meeting. And this is beyond any other information that's been done leading up to this meeting. So it's more of a finalization. Where are we at with contracts? Where are we at with budgets? What's happening? So then
you are on a little bit of the cutting edge of cancer studies, and now does Ohio State create any medicines themselves, or is this all outside companies coming in and wanting to have you administer the medications and so forth?
So there's about 3 main types of studies that occur at most institutions. There's study sponsor. A lot of them are sponsored by companies and pharmaceutical companies that you would know. Mm-hmm. Then there are cooperative group trials. They are groups of academic institutions and research institutions that have come together and they pool and do research studies together. And then there are shorthandedly known as IIT trials, investor initiated trials. So those are the physicians that, hey, this looks like it could have a positive effect. Can we do a trial and see if indeed what I'm seeing is actually causing an effect, or is it something else?
Okay.
So there are a lot of layers to research.
Right. Well, you want to make sure it's done correctly.
Yes, and unfortunately, it's extremely expensive.
Right.
Just even on the clinical trials end. So we're at the very tail end of drug process. Probably the only thing I haven't done as far as research is concerned is the in vitro bench work, where they're just coming up with stuff, giving drugs to cells specifically to see how they react. So I'm in vitro, in vivo, and beyond. In vivo is testing it in living organisms before it goes to human trials.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Interesting.
and ironically, even some of those mice that we work with, they're specialty bred for those purposes. And when I was still a husbandry tech, we had a group of mice that came in that, I mean, they were brought in specifically and they're like, these are very expensive. So those mice were 5-figure mice individually.
Wow.
Because it took so much work and engineering and gene deletion, gene addition to get them to where they were an appropriate model for this research project.
Right. Wow.
They are not cheap.
That's really interesting. I had no idea that there was such a thing as a 5-figure mouse.
Neither did I until that day. And I was like, please do not try and drown yourself. Please just be alive.
Now, with all this work you're doing, I noticed on your LinkedIn page, you talked about data and how you are trained in a variety of databases, Encore, RedCap, metadata, Rave. I've heard of none of those. Are those, obviously you need to have skills that you can apply as you are doing your work. Are these things that you were trained on before you started your position? Are these things you've picked up along the way? I guess, what role has skill development played in you climbing to where you currently are as that clinical research coordinator?
So probably the simplest way I can put it is reading comprehension. If you can read and comprehend what you're reading, that has helped me immensely. And being able to garner good nuggets of what I need to know from what I'm reading. Okay, this is really important. I understand it, and it's important to know and make note of for future reference. With the clinical research assistant, when I originally got that job, was actually a clinical research data coordinator. So you were doing all of the back-end work with any and all forms of patient materials. So you have to sign HIPAA privacy stuff yearly to make sure that you're within compliance of the HIPAA regulations. And because you're reading people's medical charts, and in a sense, you're reading a portion of their life. And while in that position, I still never saw any patients face to face. There were studies where I felt like I really got to know the patient, and they would have, in my imagination, I would figure out what they sounded like, what their life was like. And most of the patients, because the medical record is electronic, they also have a little picture in the top corner. So you could see what they look like. And most of the pictures are not great, but it's still nice to see what they look like. And so being able to get through patient materials in an efficient manner is really helpful as a clinical research assistant. RedCap and Encore are two of the main databases that academic centers use in their research. Encore is a little bit more qualitative, whereas RedCap is more quantitative, deals mostly with numbers and individual values. Encore, you can do a little bit more free form. You can have full paragraphs of text in there and be more descriptive of things. So depending on the type of research you want to do would be how you would decide between those two databases.
Right.
Metadata rave is more of the industry standard. And all three of them, if you've done even a minuscule amount of potentially surveys online, you would be able to navigate and get through those databases pretty quickly. And they're designed in such a way that when we were hiring new people to the position, I would tell them, you have to work very hard to break it. Clinical research assisting, clinical data, period, is meant to be reviewed and fixed. You go into any database fully expecting at some point there's going to be an error that you're going to have to go back and fix. And so we have QA people that work in our office, and the sponsors will send monitors on their side to look at the research and the data, and they're a double check as well. So even if you've just transposed some numbers, not intentionally, but just an error in, they will find that. They will mark it with a query, you go back in and you fix it.
Okay.
So, but you can even argue that and say, hey, you found that here, but it's actually where I'm getting my information from is this part of the database. And so sometimes that resolves it, sometimes it doesn't. And they're like, no, go to this one and use this one.
Right.
So
in your job, you're working with a lot of people, a lot of numbers, a lot of animals. You are working with anything and everything, but all of it is focused on trying to help people beat cancer, and that has to feel really rewarding. Do you feel like that's something that, do you feel like it's your purpose to help people overcome cancer, to, maybe help find that cure? How does that play a role in what you do on a daily basis?
It's more just, I want to help people as a whole. Even when I was just reading patient charts, if one of my patients had passed away, my mind is thinking, well, who is now missing that person? Because if they have a spouse, kids, grandparents, where they are generally at in their life. And there are definitely a few patients where I, again, have never met these people, but I sat at my desk and cried when they passed away. Yeah. Because that's a big deal. When I was a clinical research assistant, I was working with bone marrow transplant, which is a big thing. Mostly not getting them through the transplant per se, but taking care of the main side effect of bone marrow transplantation, which is graft versus host disease. And you can have acute graft versus host disease, or you can get chronic graft versus host disease. It's not necessarily a question of if you get it, it's more of when you get it. And yes, bone marrow transplantation is amazing and it does amazing things for people, but it also has some pretty serious risks that often, well, I shouldn't say often because very few of my patients passed away, but it's tough. It's a tough side effect to get through.
Yeah, that's interesting how you build those connections with people even though you weren't with them. And again, that goal of just, if I can help one more family not have to deal with the loss of someone, how that's motivating you to continue working toward this, and I'm sure motivating a lot of the people that you work with to try to find some solutions. So as we wrap up here, obviously you've been out of high school a little while, and you obviously learned a lot of things in that time. If there was one thing that you know now that you wish you had known when you were in high school, what would that be?
As crazy as it might sound, don't be afraid to fail. Because if you're afraid to fail, then you're afraid of potentially taking a chance that might lead you to a really good opportunity. Like with the Ohio State Marching Band, they always say, don't cut yourself. So don't work all summer learning all these fundamentals and learning how to march and learning how to play. Come tryout time, you decide, oh, I'm not good enough. If nothing else, you go and you don't make it past first cuts. Okay, you know you're going to get information as to how to do better next year. So like when I got laid off from Battelle, I could have gone a completely different route, but I still wanted to work with animals and do that kind of work because I felt like I still had opportunities and knowledge and things to learn too. And so I didn't want to not do that anymore and stop learning about it. And so I probably applied to at least 100 jobs over that summer and had a handful of interviews. But yeah, my ratio of failure to success and even just getting an interview was a big deal.
Right.
In getting the current job that I have now, I interviewed almost monthly for about 2 years for different positions within the university, and a couple outside the university as well. And my failure rate was pretty high. But I didn't give up.
Right.
And so just being able to stick your neck out one more time, try again, knowing that you could fail, but it's not final. Failure isn't final. Today is just a snapshot of the film strip that is your life. And so just not being afraid to fail at something is a big deal.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Failure isn't final. I think too many times students, adults, everyone, we kind of get really down when something doesn't go like we had hoped it would. But thankfully, as adults, we can typically look back and see, oh, well, I'm kind of glad that didn't work out because now I can see how that led me to where I am. Jessica, thank you very much for sharing everything about what you're doing at Ohio State with at the James Cancer Hospital and with that entire program as the clinical research coordinator, and wish you luck as you continue to fight against cancer and hope that someday you and others can find a solution for that.
Yep, we hope to work ourselves out of a job.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this interview with Clinical Research Coordinator Jessica MacMurray. I hope you learned valuable information from her career story. And to be sure you don't miss upcoming interviews, please click subscribe so you'll know when the next episode is released. Thank you for watching, and as always, remember the best part about Mondays is interviewing people.